We're taking a look at an iceberg chart based on Left 4 Dead, created by Reddit user Sprite_566. So to spare time, let us commence forth and look through the layers contained within the Left 4 Dead iceberg. Specials represent the 7 deadly sins. As many of you may be familiar, there are in total 7 special infected zombies that are playable in the versus mode of Left 4 Dead 2. Boomer, Smoker, Hunter, Jockey, Charger, Spitter, and the Tank. Many players have theorized that it could be possible that when Valve was creating the special infected, they based each one off of the 7 deadly sins: lust, sloth, greed, gluttony, wrath, envy, and pride. Those sins were taught by the Roman Catholic Church, and they were sins that were to never be forgiven by God. How well this holds up in the Bible itself is uncertain, but nonetheless, as I mentioned before, players speculated that each special infected represents one of these sins. To start off with the 2 most obvious ones, given the Boomer's appearance, it would be certain that he would represent the sin of gluttony. The Tank would represent the sin of wrath, due to his, apparent temperament issues. As for the other remaining 5 sins, here is what the community has concluded. The Hunter represents the sin of lust. The sin of greed would be the Charger. The Smoker represents the sin of sloth. The sin of envy would be the Spitter. And lastly, the sin of pride would be the Witch. How exactly these last 5 sins correlate with the special infected they were connected to, I'm not too sure, and I personally don't agree they have any connection other than the first 2 of gluttony and wrath belonging to the Boomer and Tank. However, if you're a true fan of Left 4 Dead, you may have already realized that there is actually 8 special infected, and that 1 was unaccounted for, and that was the Jockey. If the list only was going by playable special infected as correlations to the 7 deadly sins, it could be that the Jockey replaces the Witch for the sin of pride. He could have been a football player that played for the high school that Coach taught for. Who knows? Green Flu made in lab. The Green Flu was the virus that is responsible for creating the common infected as well as the special infected. Although it is not confirmed in-game, many believe that the Green Flu was actually a biologically engineered weapon that was created in a lab, possibly as a science project gone wrong, or worst case scenario, it was unleashed amongst the populace for population control, or another unknown ulterior motive. As crazy as this may sound, it could actually be a possibility. The idea of a zombie virus creating variants with abilities that specialize in killing people doesn't really make much sense. But if this was a bioweapon created in a lab, then it would kind of add up. Other than the Boomer's ability, that seems more like a virus spreading ability, and there are real-world species of fungi that are known to turn their hosts into mindless zombies, such as the Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, or unilateralis, or more commonly known as the zombie ant fungus. Maybe such a fungus or something similar exists in the Left 4 Dead universe, and was studied by scientists that managed to create a version of it that affects humans and used it for the wrong reasons. Or everyone has a really bad case of rabies. Really, really bad rabies. Survivors executed after Left 4 Dead 2. In the Left 4 Dead comics, The Sacrifice, we learn that the original survivors that appeared in the first Left 4 Dead game were actually carriers of the Green Flu. Even though they wouldn't succumb to the effects of the virus, they can still, however, spread that virus. We also learn that the military had been capturing and locking in containment any survivors that they rescued that showed possibilities of being a carrier. There's even in-game graffiti that the military was killing any carriers that they confirmed in an effort to study their bodies and possibly come up with a vaccination to help fight off the infected. There's also a military doctor that the first group of survivors meet in the comic that informed them that all survivors deemed carriers were killed by firing squad. Upon arrival at a central post, these survivors would be placed in lockdown quarantine together, tested and monitored to determine their status as either immunes or carriers. Afterwards, those seen as infected or carriers were killed and their bodily remains were sterilized via incineration. This was seen at the Millhaven facility that they were taken to after the farmhouse finale in Blood Harvest. We do know that the Left 4 Dead 1 survivors survived their encounter with the military at Millhouse though, because the whole Bill sacrificing himself for the crew event happens after they escape. But for the Left 4 Dead 2 survivors, we don't actually know. During the last mission of the last campaign, The Parish, the survivors were actually rescued by a military helicopter and taken to God knows where. It's safe to assume that they were taken to a military facility, and with the information that we can confirm from the comics, it's safe to conclude that they were taken in and tested on to see if they were immune or carriers, and if they just so happen to be carriers, which might be possible, then we know what their fate was. Screamer. The Screamer was a cut special infected that was supposed to originally feature in Left 4 Dead 1. According to concept art and character design notes, the Screamer was a special infected that wore a straitjacket and was incapable of directly attacking the survivors. Instead, when startled, the Screamer would run away and hide and emit loud screeching noises in an effort to alert the common infected so that they could attack the survivors. As this may have been a cool special infected to see in game, it was replaced by the Witch, and the ability to lure the infected to the survivors was given to the Boomer, who didn't have his bile ability at the time. Plantation Source 2 Port. About a decade ago, there was a leaked image from Valve of the Plantation map from the Swamp Fever campaign finale, and it was remade in Valve's in-development game engine, Source 2. That led many fans to believe that Left 4 Dead 3 was in process of being developed. However, after many years have passed, there is still no confirmation as to whether or not this was a teaser for a possible Left 4 Dead 3 game being developed. But given that Valve has been more vocal about Source 2, even showcasing many games built with this new engine, such as Half-Life Alyx and Counter-Strike 2, it is possible that a Left 4 Dead sequel could be in the mix, or even a remake. But I believe a remake would be more likely since we all know Valve can't count to 3. Ellis is a psychopath. I'm not too sure why this is an entry on the list, but I do believe I can come up with a reason as to why. Ellis is always talking about a buddy of his named Keith. Not once during the events of the game do we ever see a picture of Keith or some sort of memorabilia of him that Ellis keeps around, which is strange, because it's apparent that they were really, really close. And given that Ellis always has a story about them together that he shares with everyone else, could it be possible that Ellis actually suffers from schizophrenia and that his buddy Keith never really existed in the first place? Or was this actually a figment of his imagination? Or possibly even a coping mechanism that his brain has created as a way to comfort him as he tries to survive in this hellish scenario? But there is a graffiti in game that does have the name Keith at the end of one of the writings. Could this Keith be the Keith that Ellis talked about his endless trips? Him and his buddy Keith. Is this Keith? I don't know. You be the judge. Suicide Blitz 3. Suicide Blitz 1 and 2 is a custom campaign that was created for Left 4 Dead 1 and 2, that many regard as the best custom campaign ever made. And since there is no Suicide Blitz 3 yet, its popularity has entitled it an entry on this iceberg. But what happens if Left 4 Dead 3 does come out, and they create a Suicide Blitz 3? What happens then? Last Stand Left 4 Dead 2 port. Now, Xbox players might have an idea of this, but for these PC players of Left 4 Dead 2, you may be a little confused as to why this is an entry on the iceberg. Well, allow me to explain. So this iceberg was created 3 years ago, and during that time, the Last Stand Lighthouse Survival map was not in the game yet. However, it would be added with the Last Stand community update that was released on September 24th, 2020. That included, you've guessed it, a fully fleshed out Last Stand campaign, as well as a ton of new features such as melee weapons, maps, and mutations, and with my all-time favorite mutation that I can't imagine Left 4 Dead without, Tank Run, which I happen to make a video on, so if you're interested in it, you can watch it at the end of this video. Green flu is God's judgment. Left 4 Dead is no stranger to theories on whether or not someone or something caused the virus that plagued humanity. Similar to the green flu was created in a lab theory that was featured on an earlier tier in this iceberg. If you couldn't tell by the name, green flu is God's judgment is a theory that the Holy Man himself cursed humanity with the green flu as a way to punish us for our misdeeds and countless sins that have gone unaccounted for. There is no way to tell if this could be the case since the game doesn't really have much discussion on the creator figure in this universe. However, there is a priest character that you indirectly meet at a church in the Dead Toll campaign for the first Left 4 Dead game. Or he might be a priest, since there is no direct way to tell, so many people refer to him as Church Guy. And when you encounter Church Guy, in the church, he locks himself in the safe room and calls hordes of zombies over to kill you because he doesn't trust you at all, which is understandable. During times of extreme duress like this, you can't really go around trusting everyone you encounter. However, after you survive the hordes, the Church Guy unlocks the safe room door and opens it, but for an unpleasant surprise, he had turned into a special infected and tries to kill you. He can turn into one of 3 special infected, and the game gives you a hint as into which one he turns into before opening the door. Church Guy will turn into a hunter if you hear him growl, a smoker if you hear him cough, or a boomer if you hear him gurgle. Now, what does any of this have to do with the green flu being a punishment of God? Well, I was just about to get there. When you finally make it inside the safe room that Church Guy was hiding in, if you take a look around, you'll notice there is a manic writing on one of the walls upstairs saying, "Better safe than sorry." The same phrase he repeated before he attempted to have you eviscerated by the undead. Now you might be scratching your head thinking, what does this have to do with anything? Well, if you're just reading this writing on the wall, then throughout your entire playthrough of Left 4 Dead, you've missed out on one of the key elements that makes the game's apocalypse feel real. Throughout almost all the safe rooms in the game, there are writings on the wall from survivors that previously inhabited the room. Sometimes it's advice written for any future survivors. Other times it's a full-blown self-conversation between survivors, most of which are very one-sided. My favorites being, "Move during the day. They only come out at night. That's vampires, moron. No zombie is safe from Chicago Ted." And my all-time favorite, "Do you think they poop? I saw them poop a foot. They don't eat people, they eat feet. They don't eat feet, I'm a doctor." While most of the writings on the wall are informic and comedic, there are, however, a lot of sad ones. On the walls inside of the church, outside of the safe room, there are writings dedicated to loved ones that had been lost during the pandemic, as well as a few scattered across the game. Here are a few examples. "To Helen Lane, me and Dad love you, and we are alright. Nobody is coming to save us." Some of the text written on the walls also hint at the idea God was the one that sent the zombies as a punishment for humanity. Writings such as "Angels of Death, this is our punishment," and Exodus 9:15. This was written on one of the walls in the drain level in Death Toll. And when you look up the biblical verse that this correlates to, it says, and I quote the New International Version of the Bible, "For by now I could have stretched out my hand and struck you and your people with a plague that would have wiped you off the earth." Now in the Bible, this phrase was said by God to Moses for him to tell the Pharaoh of Egypt, just in case he retaliated against the idea of not freeing the people of Israel from captivity in Egypt. Now, from what I could presume with the evidence that we have gathered here, God is no stranger to using plagues against those he finds worthy of said punishment. So it could be that the green flu is in fact not a virus created in a laboratory, and is actually a punishment served by the divine creator. I'll leave that for you to answer. Complete Left 4 Dead 3 build shelve. This entry is basically a branch off the idea that since a recreation of the plantation map was teased but never released or any more information was ever given out on it, it could be possible that there was a beta build of sorts for a sequel to the Left 4 Dead duology, but due to development issues it was scrapped and left to be forgotten in development limbo, alongside another popular zombie title that just recently escaped from there. Or could it be that the game was released, just not the game we were all expecting? Coach, ex-Special Forces member. This was a rumor that speculated that Coach wasn't a regular high school coach he made everyone to believe. In fact, he was actually an ex-member that served in the Special Forces and used his skills of espionage that he learned in the academy to fool the other survivors to get a closer look into the green flu and report his findings back to headquarters. Zoes Father's death was pointless. This entry is one of the few that is actually sad, but true. If you aren't already familiar with Zoe's backstory prior to finding her group of survivors and the green flu outbreak, then you won't understand what this entry is talking about. If you are interested, I did make a character files video on Zoe a few months back that goes into detail on her backstory prior to the apocalypse. So if you're interested in learning more, you can check out the link in the description, or click the card on the top right of your screen that'll take you to my Left 4 Dead character files playlist so that you can learn more information. But to make a long story short, when the first outbreak occurred, Zoe and her parents were surprise attacked by a zombie that bit Zoe's mom. and turned her into a zombie. And in order to protect himself and his daughter, Zoe's dad had to kill her mom in front of her. However, this resulted in Zoe's dad being bitten as well, and in order to protect Zoe, he had asked her to kill him before he could get the chance to attack her. Basically, Zoe watched her mom die and then had to kill her father. Then in the comics, we learned from a military doctor that from studies they conducted, they learned that the immunity genetic that the survivors have that allowed them to be immune and or carriers of the green flu virus is actually from their father's side of genetics. I think you can see where this is going. So basically, Zoe's dad pulling off the heroic action of having Zoe kill him to save herself was pointless because he had the genetic that made Zoe immune to the virus anyway. But at the time, they had no way of knowing this, and realistically, that's too much of a gamble and a little selfish too, to be like, yo, don't kill me, what if we're immune, after killing your wife. Payday Crew caused the events of Left 4 Dead. As wild as this one may sound, this is also very likely, and if not, possibly the cause, realistically. There are theories that all of Valve's games take place in the same universe, or certain games share a universe, like Half-Life and Portal, and in this case, Left 4 Dead and the Payday games share a universe. In Payday the Heist, there is a heist level that has the crew go to Mercy Hospital and actually locate Patient Zero and secure a sample of their blood. Crazy, right? Well, it gets even crazier. The Mercy Hospital map was brought back to Payday 2, and it contains some extra lore behind the map. Apparently sometime in Payday 2, Bane, the dude that gives the crew the heist that they go on, gets kidnapped by an organization called Murky Water and the Kataru, and they use him to experiment with the same virus that the crew had stole from Mercy Hospital many years ago. So whoever the crew sold the green flu to had distributed around to other people's interested, and some had horrible intentions in mind with it. If it were possible to trace the butterfly effect that started the mass green flu outbreak back to the beginning, then we would find the Payday Crew to be the catalyst. That is nuts. Meat Wall. The Meat Wall was another special infected that was supposed to debut in Left 4 Dead 2, but was cut from the final game. The Meat Wall is a zombie of tall stature and actually contains 2 common infected that would emerge from his dead body after being killed. I'm actually glad this thing was cut from the game because he looks absolutely terrifying. It looks like the second cousin of SCP-173 from SCP Containment Breach. Defib Soul Steal. This entry is most likely a joke entry added by the creator of the Iceberg because I cannot find any information based on this theory. But we could play a game of speculation. The Defib is an item that can be picked up and used by the survivors to revive their teammates that have died. How exactly this works, I have no clue. Maybe it does what the theory suggests and it uses the souls of the victims of the green flu virus and uses that to bring back the deceased. But does that mean the victims of the green flu virus aren't zombies? Because in order to be a zombie, you have to be dead, right? That's why they're called undead. So maybe they're not zombies and they're just really, really sick. Like the virus implies it's just the flu. Maybe the ones revived with the Defib are the real undead. Bill is in hell. This is another entry that could be considered canonical depending on who you ask. As we all know, Bill is dead. He sacrificed himself to save Zoe, Lewis, and Francis from a horde of tanks and none other than the Sacrifice campaign. However, this would not be the last time we would hear from our bogey-smoking zombie-slaying war vet. In another game series called Dead by Daylight, Bill appears as a DLC character that can be bought and played alongside the other characters that appear in the game. Now, in terms of Dead by Daylight fan lore, the game actually takes place at a level of hell known as Purgatory. And if you're unfamiliar with the levels of hell, then I suggest researching into it, or watch a couple of these religious videos made by Wendigoon to get a rough idea. Anyway, players of the game speculate the game takes place in Purgatory and that the survivors you play as are stuck in a hellish loop of endless torment of being hunted by creatures of the damned and a couple famous horror movie figures like Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers. This explains why when the survivors escape, they never really escape. If this were to be true, then it would be suggested that after Bill sacrifices himself, he was actually sent to hell instead of reaching the paradise of heaven and will have to fight to survive for all of eternity. Poor Bill. He never found peace in life, it will never do so in death. Reality can often be very cruel. Real pain screams used. Another parody entry that may or may not have some credit. But first, let us get familiar with another theory that has little connection to the idea of this one. So many people speculate that the special sound effects we hear in movies are actually real sound effects. The most notable ones being of animals and the noises they make when they're in pain. So I guess this theory is trying to imply that the screams we hear in Left 4 Dead are in fact real blood-curdling screams made by humans in times of stress. Which could actually hold up. And that's pretty damn scary. You may have watched a video that was floating around YouTube a long while ago about how the burned man skinned in Gary's mod was actually a real burnt corpse that the developers had found in real life. And if you already put two and two together, Gary's mod is indirectly a Valve game. Nuts, I know, but as crazy as it sounds, that's actually quite frequent when video game developers comment on how they get sick or nightmares from the types of games that they're in the process of developing, and the resources and inspiration that they use to come up with these ideas haunt them as well. Most popular would be the time a NetherRealm developer was diagnosed with PTSD after working on Mortal Kombat 11. The developer described having dreams that were extremely violent and graphic, and that the developer had actually developed insomnia from keeping themselves awake to avoid these unwanted nightmares. They also described how when walking throughout the office, there would be some people watching YouTube videos while working, and others would be looking at pictures of murder victims, while others would be looking at murder victims and videos of cows being slaughtered as a form of inspiration for the fatalities they were creating. Honestly, I can make an entire video on the downside and horrifying reality that comes with developing violent video games. But to get back to the entry, the idea of developers at Valve using real screams for the zombies in Left 4 Dead isn't entirely as bogus as it may sound. Alright, so this isn't an entry, this is actually like a little note, I guess. So I was researching the entries that were coming up on this next list. Sprite did claim that all of them are troll entries and hold no type of substance. So to save everyone's time with the entries that serve no purpose, because I understand your time is valuable and I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. So I will combine the rest of the tiers 3, 4, and 5 and discuss the entries that do have some sort of evidence that support them. Once again, thank you, and let's get back into the iceberg. Closet rescues are clones. Whenever a survivor dies, they can either be revived with a defib, respawn at the beginning of a new level, or, if you're still in game, they'll spawn in a closet that they can be rescued from after being dead for a period of time. Which, in terms of video game logic, doesn't sound strange and actually works out to be quite a unique feature to bring back fallen players. However, if you start to think more heavily on it, the stranger it gets. How exactly do the fallen survivors end up in a closet after being slapped up by zombies? It's not like their corpses despawn after they're brought back into action, because you can actually return to their dead body and break the veil and see two of the same character. This shouldn't be possible, but it would be possible if they were actually clones that were left behind just in case one were to perish. But this proposes more questions. Who is leaving these clones behind? Are the survivors we're playing as the original versions of themselves? Who knows? I for sure don't. Virgil is a talking boat. Virgil is a character that appears in Left 4 Dead 2 that is a captain of a boat that comes and rescues the survivors in the Swamp Fever Plantation finale, all the way until he drops them off at the dock in the beginning of the Parish campaign. Now, where does the idea of him being a talking boat come from? Well, in Left 4 Dead 2, there are game modes known as mutations that alter the rules and gameplay of the game. One of the mutations that can be played called Last Man on Earth, which is a single player mutation that removes the bot survivors from the game and leaves only you alone. Just as the mutation describes, you will become legend to the infected as the last human left. You will play by yourself without survivor bots to back you. Only special infected will spawn. Now, if the mutation claims you're the last man on Earth, then how is it that the so-called Captain Virgil is still alive and piloting his vessel? Well, that's because there is no human captain. That Virgil is the boat. But if Virgil is the boat, then that means every other rescue vehicle that appears to save the survivors is also a sentient, inanimate object. Or better yet, they're just Transformers. Green Flu unlocks second consciousness. This actually had me thinking. Remember how in the Defib Soul Steel entry we talked about the infected might not actually be zombies and they're just really sick people? Well, what if they're not sick and they have achieved a level of consciousness to consume human flesh and attack anyone that isn't on said level of consciousness that cannot be obtained without first being infected by the green flu virus? Bit of a stretch, yes, but not entirely plausible, no. Game exists in universe. Well, the game does exist in a universe, but what universe to be exact, I have no clue. Maybe the Payday universe, since No Mercy appears in Payday. Or maybe Dead by Daylight, Left 4 Dead, and Payday all share the same universe because they all share characters and items between the game. But what if Left 4 Dead takes place in our universe as well? I mean, they do use actual real-life locations within the games. Philadelphia, New Orleans. Hell, Dark Carnival could be any carnival event going on down south, and the farmhouse in Blood Harvest could be any random creepy farmhouse in the southern East Coast. But if Left 4 Dead shares elements of our universe in the game, and they also feature elements from other universes, then what if we're all connected in one big universe? Well, that's everything. That is the Left 4 Dead Iceberg. Even though a lot of entries towards the end of the Iceberg were joke entries added in by the creator, I had a really fun time researching entries and reading into some of the fan theories that created by the community, and compiling them together in one video. I greatly appreciate all of you that took the time to watch this video, and hopefully you had a good time and learned something new as well.